Go to Tim Leader Dumont. Tim, are you there? And Tim, I want you to clarify something for me. I keep on hearing different pronunciations of your last name, and I thought that I was saying it right. Leaders Dumont, no?
That's correct.
All right, well, I'll
You've been
start
doing
correcting
great.
everybody else who says Looters Dumont. It's Leaders Dumont.
It is, yeah, it is leaders. At one point in history, some umlaut was dropped over the U and an E was substituted, but apparently my grandfather, may he rest in peace, it was leaders. So
All right, all right. I'm glad hopefully everybody knows that here and that mistake won't be made again. And it's
It is
Lalone,
you.
not Lalonde. So, okay,
Yes.
all right, now we're all.
That's why I always say Mr. Chair instead. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. I know I was with you all recently on Act 180. I was so happy that you made some time for Orleans County. I think that was very helpful. I did, full disclosure, I used to work for Judge Tebow when he was the state's attorney here, and I utilized pre-charge under policy that he had put out here in Washington County. And some of my guiding principles, which I think are driving how our prosecutors use them, is just using your common sense in terms of resource allocation. And there's no such thing as a one size fits all. And every case is different. And I think you've heard that. Also, on the other side, right, there should be uniform data collection so that you can measure success and measure financial savings, measure the utilization, and all of that. And I think you've heard from me on a number of occasions where you'll hear, oh, there's no pre-charge in this county, when there has been, right? And I think it just, some of the semantics and the use of terminology results in some of that confusion, and you're working to address that in terms of the data collection. So by hook or by crook, by whatever funding sources you determine, the option of deflecting something, and I'll say deflecting to cover both pre-charge and community referral, both types of things. The option of deflection is something that we're going to use regardless of statute and that we have used. This is going to be helpful. What you're working on will be helpful in terms of measuring the deflection volume that we're already engaged with, and that we will continue to do. As you heard, Orleans is one of the counties that hadn't published a policy yet, but it'll be published by probably tomorrow. So that's add another one to the list of ones that are on our website, prosecutors.vermont.gov. If you go to resources, you can see the posted policies for Vermonters to check out what their state's attorney has in terms of a policy. And I'm open to any questions. The data, you've heard the data thing a number of times. It's my number one point.
Mr. Leaders Dumont, Karen has a question for you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, thanks. I feel like you hit on a lot of the key things. The data, definitely something we're going to be working on, and the pre-charge policies. Thank you for your work and working with state's attorneys on that. I did want to ask a question about one piece I heard, though, is that you had said that state attorneys will use pre-charge or deflection regardless of if this is implemented. And so I just want to pause on that, because what we're hearing from centers, restorative centers, is that they won't be able to do it if it's not funded. So right. If you can explain how it will happen.
It's a good question. That's why I'm using the word deflection. We're going to continue to decline cases that are not weighing on the side of good use of resources in the system. We're going to, what I used to do, even when one of our pre-charge programs, CJCs here, maybe wasn't a good fit, I would sometimes get a call from defense attorney in a case that we were thinking about, and talk, right, about if there's another community resource. And I think this gets to State's Attorney Leva's point of community resources in communities that have places like stop-in centers for mental health, and walk-in places, street teams that go out and walk around and engage with people, places that have more resources. We have better deflection opportunities. And in places like Brattleboro, they have a deflection program down there that Chief Hardy, you could hear from her on at some point. Tracy Shriver, the former state's attorney, has talked about this, and part of that is captured on our website. But I think it just means that state's attorneys will continue to deflect cases. That said, this type of codification of where the tracking it is going to be helpful, because we don't have the staff or resources to track it. We're just going to refer, deflect, because that's the ease of utilization is something that I think this will hopefully help with, and the accessibility. I mean, some could consider a case declination where we tell the officer, case is declined. You should tell the individual that you're not, it's declined for now, but they should go engage in, mental health and maybe let you know how that's going. I mean, there's informality to some of how the interactions in a police department in a small town in Vermont, where I'm good friends with the chief. He refers to it as the boiling pots. So all those boiling pots in the community, that happens in a lot of communities in terms of keeping an eye on things. And so there is low level deflection happening kind of regardless. What you've worked on here will help us track the formalization when it does go to like a CJC program or a diversion program. Some of them get unified and all of that. And I think that will be really helpful, but state's attorneys will decline, deflect, say, maybe this isn't the best place for this case kind of regardless. So there is a distinction, not to hinder your efforts here, but just as a point that discretion is being exercised regardless of formalization.
Okay, and I think what I'm also hearing is that this would be a kind of critical tool in that deflection, in addressing those deflections, if it's funded and exists.
Right, and particularly like in a place like you heard today, like Orleans, there is some like the NECA program is up there and is doing multiple things. So that's a place that, right, you want to be able to have the tool and the option. The state's attorney up there doesn't have as many options to refer things at the community level as a larger community with more population, et cetera. So, but yes, it's a good distinction point. Yep.
Thanks.
Julie, you have a question? You look like you did.
I always look like that. No, but I will say, Tim, thank you for the tip. I didn't realize that prosecutors.vermont.gov existed, and it's very user-friendly website.
Well, I'll just say this, Annie Noonan, operations manager, part of my new role is the ED. I'm supposed to go through and try to update things and work on that with some of our team here. So there's certain things on there which are a little dated. Please forgive us. And there's other things on there like the resources page, which has some good new information, recent data stuff that I presented to you last month. And the CJC pre-charge restorative, I did 3 slashes. CJC pre-charge diversion restorative policies. Yeah.
There they are.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Lots of reading material, and Orleans County will be posted shortly.
Excellent. That's great. Other questions for Tim? Not seeing any. Thank you so much, Tim. I appreciate it. And we'll invite Heather. I was going to say to the hot seat, but it's really not.
You, Chair Lalonde.
Yes, thank you for being here.
Thank you all for having me. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Heather Hobart, and I'm the Executive Director of Lamoille Restorative Center. I've worked there I had to do the math this morning, and I've been there for 26 years. So our mission, I sent a little information about us to you all. And it's really, we're not going to talk a lot about our organization, but for background, I thought it might be helpful. Our mission is to uphold the dignity and resilience of individuals and families through principles, through restorative justice principles and programs. So we are the 1RJ organization for our county. Last year we served, you'll see in our annual report, 664 people. About half of those people were folks who were served through our prevention programs. So an employment program that we have called Jobs, our school engagement program that helps young people go to school, our youth development program. The other half, 353 folks, and if you have that annual report pulled up, actually have paper copies if anybody would like them, it's in the upper left-hand corner of that annual report is probably where you'd like to focus your attention. The other half, 353 of those folks were more in the legal side of the system. So that's court diversion, pretrial services, victim services, TAMRAC, et cetera. We have really good outcomes with those services. And an example of that is we had a 90% success rate with adults, 80% success rate with youth in those programs.
Okay, back up just a little bit further back here. So can you describe the actual process when somebody comes into diversion? I know that you may not be doing as much pre-trial, but if it's pre-trial or just court diversion, what is the process? What's that mean? Chief Burke talked about contracts and fulfilling contracts. Can you just give us like the diversion 101 and really want to understand what success means?
Sure. So I'll focus really quickly on the referral process, and then we'll zoom through as though somebody completes and then talk about that.
Perfect, thank you.
So our referral comes from our prosecutor, and our prosecutor in Lamoille is State's Attorney Aliana Gerhard, who is an amazing prosecutor. She's been in that position for a year. So she makes the referral. We review the referral and decide if it's appropriate or not. And then we meet that person in our county at court to meet with them, talk with them about the process, have them apply for court diversion, and then have them come to our office and do an intake. So we talk with them at that point about sort of all parts of their life. We also have them sign up. We have them sign a release. And we have them sort of understand the pieces of diversion that are important, which is really about taking active accountability, which I want to point out is much different than passive accountability, which are the parts that are pretty typical in retributive justice, the parts that are existing in the judicial system as it typically exists, which are everything you've heard about around RJ, which is who have you harmed and how do you want to make this right? So we're talking with people at intake around who they've harmed and how they want to make that right. And we're preparing them typically for coming back to talk with us and other volunteers and volunteers as well about that harm. And sometimes we invite harmed parties or victims to come to that meeting as well to talk with us. At that point, we're having a contractual agreement with that person. The contract is carried out pretty much on their own with ongoing communication with a case manager about how things are going. Zoom through to however long that takes. I think the average time it takes is about 3 months in our county. And I think Will could speak to how typical that is across the state. And when they complete, we notify our prosecutor, State's Attorney Gerhard, and she dismisses the charge. Is that helpful? Any questions about that?
I guess a couple questions. One, how would the referral be different if it was pre-charge? Because we talked about.
So that the referral could come in our county. We've talked with our with State's Attorney Gerhard about her reviewing pre-charge cases, and that's our agreement. So if they came from the police or from the prosecutor, she would have reviewed all of them. And they would happen quickly, more quickly than we've also agreed that would happen more quickly than typically they're happening now. But those referrals would look pretty much the same, but on a more rapid basis. The only difference is that we'd be avoiding all of that, the court process. So there would be no, the referral would happen from her office. We would talk to whoever was referred, and then all of that court stuff, not happening, not meeting them at court, not having them, having the court process being taken up. It would be a referral from the prosecutor. We're talking to that person and the harm party and starting that process immediately. I think Alexis did a great job of talking about how quickly that can happen. Even when we move really quickly with the legal system, it's just, you all know, so slow. And I think the pre-charge process can avoid some of that and help, especially harmed parties, victims, but also we call them participants in our office as well. Participants be able to take much more immediate accountability for what they did.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Thank you for coming in. I can tell you it's the best piece of marketing collateral that we've seen.
Ah.
So I proudly give you that award.
Can't wait to tell my people back at the
It
shop.
really is. It really is great. So, and
We have gold stars up there.
and today we will send you home with one. So at the outset, I just want to say that this is a very nice way of laying everything out and all the great services that you and your team provide. So I think that's great. Two questions. One is looking at the success rates for adults and children. I noticed that you, or not children, but youth rather, are twice as likely not to be successful. So I'm curious, like, what factors contribute to that success rate?
Well, in that, I don't have it in front of me.
10%, 20%.
Right, to not be successful. And I don't know who has children in the room, but I have a soon-to-be 18-year-old at home and also a soon-to-be 15-year-old at home. I'm forgetting.
Yeah.
I'm not sleeping too much. And their brains are not really, there's a lot of impulsivity happening. And so it takes a real village, in all honesty. And the best that we can do is help sort of be with them in that journey. And also, this is something that Will and I were talking about earlier. I think a real key to our work is to talk about support and equally accountability. And it's really critical. We have to be really honest about that. We're providing support and accountability. And when we're off balance about that, people don't do well. And so part of our program directors' jobs is to help case managers, for example, who are maybe having a really hard time when they're working with a young person who's struggling. They don't want to hold them as accountable to say, like, I think it's time to really bring this young person in and say, this is not going well. What can we do to talk about accountability? And of course, when we're doing, this is what we talk a lot in our office about, our best work, we're always struggling with that tension. Because as anyone who's a parent or who's ever been maybe a kid, it's a hard place to live. So I think that's, and especially in House Judiciary, a place that you all live, is trying to talk about both those things concurrently and balancing those. So I really appreciate you considering that and being attentive to it. And also that kids screw up. And so we do talk a lot with kids about being okay with making those mistakes and allowing for that. And I think, your attention to some of that through some of the bills that have come out around kids really has paid attention
Sure. Thank you.
to that as well.
The next question I have is just on the chart actually right below that, and just looking at the cost of court diversion versus traditional criminal cases.
Mhm.
I know that in the footnote, the prices or the cost has been adjusted for inflation. I see the data is from 2014. I'm just curious if you feel this is if it's an accurate representation of the costs in the Vermont justice system in 2025.
Yeah, I think that Willa made a note, and I know it came up earlier about having Prime Research Group. I think Robin's coming tomorrow to be able to speak to that. It feels old now. So much has changed.
Yeah.
And I wonder about looking at it again. I know that those things cost money, but it's a question that gets asked every time we talk about this.
Yeah.
So I do think it's a really good question to be asking. When we printed this last time, I was like, that's an old study. Feels pretty old. It's a little bit embarrassing, because so much has changed since that study came
And
out.
that's why I asked the questions.
Yeah.
It's not to, discredit.
No,
the data.
I agree
It's
with you.
just, like, the cost could be exorbitantly more,
Right.
and like realistically. And so I'm just curious, one, to get accurate numbers, but two, specific to Vermont, because I'm curious about how we kind of fit into the broader
Yeah, I
judicial
think,
landscape in the country.
yeah, I think any studies that are looking at cost, as we know, even that are 4 years old, feel old.
Data,
Right?
yeah, sure. Thank you. That's it.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm just more curious about a lot of things.
I appreciate that.
What's included in the cost of, say, an assault or a drug crime, or I'm trying to figure out what kind of
Yeah, we could send that.
instances.
We can send that study around. Of course, I don't have it, can't cite all of the details in it. But I remember from when it came out, it was all of the pieces of the judicial system all sort of stacked up. So
Estimation of
Yeah.
hourly salaries, stuff like that.
yes, yeah, all the way along. You can imagine the judge cost and all those pieces.
Does
And
it
we-
go as far as maybe also include building rent and
I don't
electricity
remember that.
for your
Willa, do you remember that?
facilities? 'Cause it-
Rob, answer the question.
Just identify yourself for the record.
Willa Farrell, Attorney General's Office. So the study, which this is the crime research
Yeah.
study, was conducted It's with Vermont data.
Yeah,
And they had previously done a study of costs of the judicial system. And they took different cases and they did a time study with lawyers,
yeah,
court staff, judges. I think it was really just labor. I don't think it.
That's what I remember too.
Infrastructure costs. And then we did the same thing. We had 4 counties who did a time study. And then they analyzed comparable cases, sort of as much as they could, similar people who were charged with, say, a disorderly conduct and went through the court system. And so what that type of crime costs, because that's obviously a much smaller cost than a murder trial. And then they compared it to what did it cost based on labor within the court diversion staffing. So that's my rather crude summary of what Robin could explain.
Yeah, we'll have Robin in tomorrow as well, so. All right, so we can continue. I cut you off early there. I apologize.
yeah, no problem. So I just want to say that we have a very collaborative relationship with Aliana Gerhard, our prosecutor, and our local police departments. And we're ready to provide pre-charge programming in our community once there's funding to allow us to do that. Police have requested the option on a regular basis for low-level incidents. And I have just 3 examples of that, and they've actually come from 3 different police departments. And this is just things that came to me rather recently over recent months. Small thefts from stores. So we had a police department that was looking, he and another merchant were really looking for help with that, for a swift response around that. Excessive speed for driving offenses. And then a really specific call from one department around a particular case of an 18-year-old who was living at home, had never been in trouble before, had stolen his parents' vehicle. Again, there's some more driving stuff. So excessive speed, being charged with operating without owner's consent, and careless and negligent driving. State's Attorney Gerhard's position is that she's ready to make referrals once there's funding to do so. And the referrals that the policy that we just mentioned that's posted online states that under the Lamoille policy. She, like the police, intend to utilize pre-charge for low-level offenses to allow her to focus her attention on more high-risk, high-needs cases. She and I both support options that will improve court efficiency and to continue to reduce the backlog, and we think pre-charge is a really valuable one. I'm happy to take questions about cost. I know you've had a number of them, if you have them. And I also heard questions earlier from Coach, if he's still on, about federal dollars, if anybody has any questions about that. So I'm just here to answer any questions that you all have.
Questions? Karen?
Back to my same question, about just the budget piece of this, just to clarify. So you're not offering any pre-charge right now,
Correct.
and you'd only be able to if the program was funded.
That's right. Yeah,
So those cases, if pre-charge will be going to the court if we don't fund this program.
that's right. Yes.
Thank you.
So maybe this is a question I should have asked law enforcement, but I'll ask you anyway. So presumably those cases will go to the court, but it seems like another option is that law enforcement just doesn't forward them up and just there's no charge, there's no nothing, which that presents a different problem in my view, which is there's no consequence. There's either no consequence or more expensive consequence. Is that fair to say, or is it more likely that it just goes to the court and it'll be a delayed consequence as opposed to?
I actually think either of those options could be happening. And I just want to highlight really quickly the experience in Lamoille County we had an exceptionally high backlog 2 years ago of over 1,000 dockets. And Aliana, our prosecutor, Kirk Williams, our defender, and Judge Mary Morrissey really took it upon themselves to take action on that backlog. And it is no coincidence that at the same time, people in our county were really scared and also very, very angry about what was happening around crime in the community. And I can say, I was just talking to Aliana this morning about this, that since that backlog has been cleared, the sentiment in the community has really shifted. And that's not to say that we still have some, anger around the conditions of release laws that haven't changed and people that are cycling through. And that is a whole nother issue that we're not talking about here. What I notice is that the sentiment around the credibility of the system has changed, both in the for defendants and for victims who are experiencing that system, and for community members who are noticing it, feeling like it's doing its job again, things are working again. And I really think that matters on a lot of levels. And I went to a coffee group with about 20 women in the community who've had coffee for 30 years together on Tuesday mornings. And they invited me there. I brought the prosecutor with me because they were concerned about what the community safety thing was all about. And we talked about how things have shifted over the last year. And I think that that's what matters, is bringing credibility back to the system. This is a way that we can do that. I think it's really important to not confuse those two things. We still will have the challenges around conditions of release and really challenging people that are going to continue to cycle through. And we need to be able to focus on them. This will allow us to focus on them.
Appreciate that. Ian.
I don't know if I missed it, I apologize. So have we asked or have you testified how much will it cost for pretrial diversion in Lamoille
Yeah,
County?
I can speak to it for my own, having run the organization. I've been the director there since 2011. So I have experience in budgeting. It costs us $100,000 for one FTE at LRC. And I really hesitate to have parts of people at LRC because we can't hire parts of people anymore. I cannot get people to come in for a day and a half a week. So I think your next question will probably be, how many pre-charge cases might you get? Like, do you think you'd have enough referrals to come be, worthwhile for a full-time person? I think that would happen. Do I have a way of absolutely promising that? I don't know. What I have to tell you is it's really hard for me to hire like a 20% person. So generally when I get asked this question, what I say is it costs me $100,000 to hire a full-time person.
Appreciate that. Coach, you have a question?
We were during your conversation, thank you for coming. You did mention that you have a little more insight into how much funding we garner from the Department of Justice.
Hmm.
So if you would, I would appreciate that information for the committee, because I think we really need to be aware of how we might need to backfill, some of that, funding in
Mhm.
order to make sure that the great services that you guys are providing, and I mean that, respectfully, uh, is important.
Yes, thank you, Coach, for the question. It's been an interesting 3 weeks being an executive director of a nonprofit. We have, you'll see on the annual report under victim services, I think we served 51 or 52 people last year. That victim services program is served through federal funding. It is not specifically DOJ funding, Coach, but it is federal dollars that comes through VAWA money. So it's in question. And right now with the freeze being off, it's back, it's okay, but it is in question for us. The other funding is not relevant to you all, so I won't mention it. But the question that I have that hasn't been brought up, and I don't want to cause alarm, but I'm wondering about barge funding because it is Medicaid match. So I haven't had time yet to ask that question, but I do wonder about it. It's global commitment money.
Right, right. The other question, because of the potential for alcohol and drug intervention in some of these cases, especially a lot of the pre-charge cases, the question becomes SAMHSA funds as well.
Yes, and I haven't heard anything about that because I don't have any SAMHSA funds at my organization, so
Okay,
I don't know.
Okay, I wasn't
Yeah.
sure. Okay, thank you.
Yes, so just to be really granular, the victim services money that we receive is 53,000. And the barge funding is a little over 200. But I'm not sure about the global commitment money. I haven't heard anything about that, so I don't want to cause any alarm about it.
Yeah, we have enough alarms going on. We'll wait.
I'm trying to keep those alarms back there.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So we'll hear from Willa now, and she's gonna tell us how much this is all gonna cost and how you derived the budget costs. Unless you have other things introductory, you're welcome to, but thank you for being here, Willa. Appreciate it.
Willa Farrell, Attorney General's Office, Court Diversion and Pretrial Services. I'm happy to be back here talking about pre-charge and Act 180. I did have some introductory comments about pre-charge, post-charge, and so in some ways it may be a bit repetitive, but maybe I'll try to make it a synthesis. We'll see how I do. I had wanted to start by just sort of laying the broader context of both pre and post-charge diversion, and just that point that many people have said already about taking cases offline and early and soon after crime is being committed. In general, all our work is really informed by, a bulk of research done in the criminal justice field that talks about risk level. So really matching the intervention to the risk of the individual. I mean, and this is not just in our world, but throughout, corrections field. Looking at the needs related to the person that led to their behavior. And in the context of restorative justice, also looking at the needs of the victim. And then being responsive to the individual So if somebody has a learning disability, you're going to work with them a little differently. If they have two jobs, how do you accommodate that so you're not taking them away from their employment? And I say all that to sort of capture the individualized nature of the work that we're doing. You've heard a lot of talk about restorative justice. I want to really highlight that piece about active accountability, which is really striking to me when I've gone to courts, sat through arraignment, and I see people, defendants who say two words, not guilty. That's all they ever say. I never hear a victim speak about what their experience was and what they want. And that's really, to me, the core difference is that the people who are most effective are talking about what happened and how can they make it better, what are their needs, and that an individual, whether it's a low-level offense or not, it's still huge for a victim, and it's significant for the individual who did it, and it is much more meaningful to have to say, I did this, I wasn't thinking, or I was, or whatever the story is, and talk about how I am going to make amends. So I really just have to always try to stress those points because they're really core to the work of pre-charge and post-charge diversion. The quick piece I wanted to note about the post-charge diversion is judges also find probable cause. So there is the prosecutor role and there's also a judge role and all the court staff. So it is more administratively court involved than pre-charge, which others have named. And the other thing that I've noticed as I'm learning about pre-charge and reading state's attorneys' policies is in some areas, pre-charge is truly the discretion of law enforcement officers. So that individual officer has a policy that they work under, and then they make that individual determination. In other counties, state's attorneys have said, before that goes, I want to see it. So I think, to go back to a recent point, if there is not funding for pre-charge, the unknowns, some of the knowns are that in certain parts of the state where there's a lot of pre-charge, most of that is going to end up in the court. And when, I'm getting ahead of myself, in communities such as Lamoille, we don't really know now what crimes low-level officers are just don't have time or the resources, or they're not going to waste anyone else's time by writing up an affidavit when they know their prosecutor's office is busy and doesn't have the resources to deal with it. So there is, I think, some inequity in accountability that is happening statewide. Talking a little bit about the act itself and the move to the Attorney General's office, there's a lot of specificity in the law about what we need to do in terms of clear expectations about communication with victims and responsible people, about roles and responsibilities of all parties. We will be tasked with developing a manual, and I wanted to borrow the words that Heather used about support and accountability. And frankly, even though I'm talking about organizations, I see that's part of my role, and the role of the Attorney General's office is to provide support through training and funding and policy guidance to programs about how to do good work, how do we learn from what's happening here to inform there, but also the whole program's accountable. Like, why are these cases open so long? Why haven't you made use of the restitution unit? We got this victim survey and they said XYZ. What is your response to that? So it's a dual role, and I think it's really important. I think data helps us do that. It is a way of certainly tracking successful completion, but it's also a tool for like a more granular level of looking at how is the work happening, and for programs to say, how do I compare in this, microcosm compared to my peers? Which makes, I think I see.
Ken, this question.
Yes.
Can I just back way up?
Certainly.
You said, I think what I heard you say
was law enforcement was going and doing their job and stuff like that, but then when it goes to the prosecutors or whatever, they decide whether they want to do it or not because they could be overworked or something. Could you just read that to me again?
I don't think I was clear. So when it comes to a post charge, the state's attorney charges the case and the person is arraigned and the prosecutor says, I'm recommending court, or I offer you court diversion. With pre-charge diversion, currently, in some counties, as Chief Burke described, the police officer refers the case directly. And then in other counties, it is, for example, in Windham County, the state's attorney's office looks at that case before it is referred. The piece that I said that I think caused confusion was that, now I've lost my train of thought.
Don't worry, it wasn't confusion, it was alarm.
No, I'm getting confused by you. Sorry. I'm sorry, Representative Gosselin, would you mind just repeating the question?
There was something you said, there was something in there that you said that, or I thought you said, something about they didn't want to do part of their job or something, and that.
No, so I really don't know what I think may be happening, but we don't know because we don't collect. Officers what I know about police departments is they're short-staffed.
Yeah.
And officers have very hard, stressful jobs.
Yeah.
And so when they're making a decision what to do around an incident, I'm not a police officer, so, this is my somewhat.
It wasn't the officers though.
Oh, no, I am talking about police officers. How do they make the decision whether to file a charge, make a referral? There's a certain element of discretion there. I think that on occasion, an officer may say, this is very minor. I have to go back and deal with that other more significant case. So I'm going to talk to the individual, but I am not going to charge them with a crime. I'm guessing, I really want to be clear, that people who are busy have to make those sort of judgment analyses.
Didn't think it was the officer. I thought it was who the officer sends it to is what I thought I heard, but I'll look at the tape. But anyway.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question.
And it may well be that prosecutors do similar analysis. Like, here's a case. Do I put my office's time into prosecuting it, or do I deflect it or divert it?
Yeah. So
That's clear.
no, I think so. And I just want to clarify as well that for the post-charge diversion or court diversion, it does happen pre-arraignment, but they have to still find probable cause. But if it's arraignment, they would have to do a plea of guilty or not guilty. And it doesn't get to that point. It's a little bit before.
Yeah, it's people do tend to have to go to the courthouse.
Right. Yeah.
They don't, yes.
That's right. But,
it happens before arraignment, but.
It
can happen, but I think most of the time it happens before arraignment. Is my understanding.
Yes, typically. The thing that I have learned in the past year is I've learned more about pre-charge that makes it different than post-charge diversion is the speed. It happens quickly. And I think Alexis gave that illustration that the victim gets contacted much more quickly and the person is engaged in a process much more quickly than if they are going to court and getting referred. And the other piece is really the close connection between pre-charge providers and law enforcement. And Chief Burke referenced this in many places, but not all. People are housed in police departments. And so there's a really close connection with officers, and they know and trust and respect the work that is being done by the restorative justice provider. And there's a feedback process that happens there, which I think really adds to the effectiveness and the value of this work. I'm trying to condense my comments here.
So we only have 5 minutes more.
Okay.
And I know which,
That's,
well, no, because we'll bring you back in because I certainly want to understand what the budget ask is.
Yes.
And then we're going to need to dig into how you've come up with whatever figure that is.
right.
So we can hold everybody kind of in, in suspense, or you can tell us, what is in the governor's budget and what is not as just a figure that we're dealing with. And then we can dig in because the bell's starting to ring.
Okay.
And it tolls for us. So
I will say very briefly that the governor's budget does not include funding for pre-charge. As you may recall, the governor did veto Act 180 and this legislature overrode that veto. So our office has put together a proposal. We have yet to go to House appropriations, so I don't want to go into a lot of detail out of, courtesy and respect of the process, but I will say we are asking for approximately 1.7 million, and that is to continue services where it exists and to expand that statewide. And when I come back, I would be happy to tell you more about how we came up that. And when I say we, it's the finance director in our office and myself.
yeah, well, that would be great. So so when are you going to appropriations?
I believe it's the 24th of February. It's a
Okay, so
Monday.
we're gonna want, I don't think you'll be messing with the process at all if we understand where you came up with
Okay.
those figures, because we'll need that in advance of the 24th because our memo regarding our recommendations on the budget is due on the 26th.
Okay.
That probably doesn't give us quite enough time. I do have some time scheduled for tomorrow, if you're available to continue your discussion and then get in. And if we could have you in at 1 o'clock and we'll be out of here by 2.
Okay.
Everybody will be out of here by 2. Does that work with your schedule?
I believe so. Yeah, I'm sure I can.
Okay, all right, because we have a couple other witnesses, a couple other
Yes.
things going on in the morning that we're trying to fit in. So we'll give people a few minutes. We have a couple of bills on the floor, so we need to make sure that we're out on time. But I really appreciate it, and thank you for your flexibility. I'm sorry we couldn't get all the way through.
No, it's fine.